I'm now pleased to welcome Professor Richard Page, who's going to talk to us about his career journey and also provide us with some practical advice on how to give a good talk. Professor Richard Page is an academic chair of orthopaedics at Deakin University, Barwon Health and St John of God Hospital. He is a specialist shoulder, upper limb and trauma surgeon whose research covers shoulder replacement surgery, biomaterials and biomechanics, orthopaedic trauma and extensive clinical trial experience in surgery. Please welcome Professor Richard Page.
Great. Thank you, and thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm a disruptor. I'm an orthopaedic surgeon. Everybody stand. We're about movement. 10 seconds, that's it. Just stretch your legs, stretch your arms, reach up. Excellent. Now sit down. So you've had you need to fuel the brain. You've had a long time sitting down. Look, it's actually a pleasure to follow Erica. Not that we know each other, but our journeys are not that dissimilar in that I don't have a PhD either, and I make absolutely no apologies for it. And I'm from a different background, and no, it hasn't held me back either. But I do supervise PhDs and Masters and Honours, and I think there is great value in that because it creates structure, organisation, and leads people down sort of pathways of thinking. These are just my declarations, most of them around research and educational grants. So just a quick overview. So I'm just going to give you a little bit about myself. I come from a different background, about how I got into research and perhaps a little bit of the why, and then talk about some of the different types of research that you can engage in, and I think you've heard about many of these as a clinician. And I'm an accidental researcher. This was not part of my life plan, but the more I got into it, the more I thought this is definitely for me. And I think it can be for many people from different aspects. And research is such a diverse church. There are many different ways that you can achieve that. So I'm from one of these islands, but not the big one. I'm from the little one. And I actually don't live in Melbourne. I live down here now. So I was very grateful to get a park pretty close by because I drove up just now. But this is where I was from. So you might have noticed on that map, I was from the middle of Tassie, not from either of the cities. I was actually supposed to be a sheep farmer, and that's what I was born and raised to be. And I also had aspirations to play footy. I played quite a bit of footy when I was younger, but things changed. This is what my family history was in transport and Royal Mail, and that was the view outside our front door when I grew up. But things changed, so we literally sold the farm, so I had to think of something else to do. I was from a sandstone institution, but this is the one I grew up on in my primary school, so different level of sandstone. And university was certainly not part of our, family expectation, although my mother was a teacher. So this is what I thought I would be doing, managing merino sheep and as a grazier. But I had to change tack, and I was very fortunate that this happened. And this is, I think, something for when you're young. Things happen at certain points in your life, so you just have to be receptive to new ideas along the journey. Because these opportunities, sometimes you weren't expecting or you weren't planning, but that's exactly the right time for them to make you think and challenge what you're doing. So I also did this. This is the other thing I did for a decade. I was a Navy surgeon or a Navy medical officer, and that took me to a whole lot of places and presented challenges. But the combination of agriculture and military meant that I was perpetually challenged on a daily basis and had to make decisions on the spot. And sometimes that's what being a clinician is about. But it's also, as we've just heard from Erica, it's also about those opportunities and filtering. Is this a good one? Is this a good one for now or not? But that was also the opportunity. I met a few people in Sydney to do, when I was quite junior and incredibly naive, and this is where a PhD would have been very helpful, to do a randomised controlled trial. And in the 90s in surgery, that was almost unheard of in Australia. Needless to say, like a lot of good ideas at the time, because it lacked the structure, we didn't finish it. But it did teach me a few things along the way. The other great thing about being a clinician is some of those other journeys you get to do along the way and the opportunities you have. Medicine is an incredibly, and research within that is actually quite mobile, and opportunities come up along the way. So I got to do trauma fellowship training in Edinburgh. That was a great town to live in. I also did another fellowship at the birthplace of joint replacement surgery, where Sir John Charnley worked, who developed the first hip replacements, and then spent some time at the Mayo Clinic as well as a few other centres in the United States, travelling around and meeting great people. And people who are innovative are also very giving of their time generally. It's like the old saying, if you want to get somebody to do something, find the busiest person in the room and they'll generally get it done. So why be a clinician scientist? Well, I'm going to give you perhaps my pitch, and I know you've had a few of these already today, but at the end of the day, as a clinician, our mantra or our mandate is to provide best care. So the way to be certain about that is to measure and ensure that what you're doing has the best outcomes. And it also gives, being involved in research means that you sometimes have the opportunity to give the best outcomes and or make available some of the newest innovations. So that's a good reason to do it. And in my field, the fascination is because as it stands, certainly in the Australian community, in fact in the Western world, musculoskeletal disease has the highest burden of any disease in the country, but certainly the world. In fact, 1 of 3 people in this room will be affected by musculoskeletal disorder, and 1 of 7 in our community will have arthritis that requires treatment. Now, it's not kids or cancer, you may not die from it, but it will impact on your life. And the cost to our community is over $55 billion for MSK diseases alone. So you look at that and think, okay, we really need to make sure that we're spending our dollars wisely here and get bang for buck. So that's really what research does. It looks at the care we provide, ensures that we're getting best value out of it. And we have a social mandate or a social responsibility to do that as clinicians. The other great thing about being a clinician and being a clinician researcher is you're in the centre of treating patients. So in that environment, you have direct contact with people you treat or things that you may be interested in or that your patients are affected by, that you can both measure the outcomes of, but also look at different ways of tweaking how you deliver that care and seeing that that makes a difference. And at the end of the day, our research is about trying to make a difference in a positive way, okay? And that may be on a small patient-to-patient level or maybe on a larger systems level or hospital or systems level. So we've heard a bit about sort of asking good questions, and this is a structured way about how we get our juniors, our researchers to use this framework, the PCOTS framework, to do an analysis of this. Is this a question that can be deliverable? Because at the end of the day, when you're young and enthusiastic, you come up with great ideas. What we've heard from Erica is about the feasibility about it. And that's where you need to get some senior help or a mentor to try and help you shape your idea and make it into something that is deliverable. So in our small research environment, we've been going for a reasonable amount of time. We actually started our little local research unit nearly 30 years ago, and it's slowly grown over that time. But it's very clinically focused. It's embedded in a hospital, and it has hospital people involved in it. And we got involved, again, opportunistically, because the flavour of the month for investigating and treating blood clots at the times was an orthopaedic environment, because knee replacement surgery was very good at creating blood clots, not usually serious ones, but blood clots nonetheless. So there was a lot of money going around with some new, at the time, novel preventative agents, and we were able to set up some we involved some of those trials. So that enabled us to fund a couple of other people, like a research coordinator. And I think that's the other thing, is a clinician, you need to either align yourself to or work with people who can enable your work, because as clinicians you're busy and you'll always be time torn between the two mandates, between treating your patients, and clinical work has a great capacity to suck up your time for a good reason, but there is a lot of time creep in that. So you want to have people around you who can facilitate and enable your work. So joining a team or being associated with a team is a really good idea. So these are just a handful of our members, but particularly the shoulder group who I work with, and we've got a couple of postdoc fellows who enable us to progress our ideas, help with write-ups and a whole lot of grant activity. And out of really thin air, we've developed sort of a pillars of work around clinical research, around registries. I'll speak about registries. I'm a big data enthusiast as well, so I was pleased to hear that earlier, but also around basic sciences. So underpinning a lot of what we do, and I'm not a basic scientist, but I know people who are, and what I have that they don't have is patience, and patience with problems. So there's a great synergy there. And that's also meant we've got to grow collaborations, and that word's been thrown around a lot, and I think it's really important that working with other people, so that's developing relationships. So you need to reach out and attach yourself or align yourself to people, and that's the other word, alignment. So align what you want with what somebody else is doing. It's very hard to turn the Titanic around, but it's a lot easier to attach yourself to something that's got momentum that's going in a certain direction. So you need to align what you want and where you're going with something that's already happening. And we've had great collaborations with Oxford researchers, with people from up here from Melbourne Uni, and as well as elsewhere in the world. So I'm just going to run through some examples of little things that little seeds and trees that we've planted that have grown into much bigger things that wasn't anticipated. Some of this is, as I said, is fortuitous. So we started biobanking just locally on some local conditions because we were interested in some interesting diseases that are sort of semi-unique to what I do. One of them's frozen shoulder. So we started biobanking cases of frozen shoulder, and out of that we did some clinical comparisons about how people who get frozen shoulder are different from other people. And then we did a genomic, this is exploratory research, this is good fun, but sometimes it's hard to harness the direction in it. But we started identifying markers and targets that may be therapeutic targets to either measure disease progression or hopefully one day targets to limit the disease at all. We've also done the similar sort of work with other conditions such as osteoarthritis of shoulder, tendon tears, and musculoskeletal injuries to tendons. Clearly, as a clinician, you don't have all those skills, so you need to align yourself. I'm, again, not a benchtop researcher per se. It's not what I've grown up with. But there's a lot of people around us who are and who can produce big data like this, which in actual fact is when you're trying to identify which one of these data points is the one of interest. It's a bit like playing golf with this kind of ball. It can be sometimes hard to find. But we're in an exciting time, and I'm excited for the young face in this audience because the tools that are being developed very rapidly for analysing and interpreting big data are growing enormously, and they're going to inform a lot of our work through machine learning and AI. So we've been starting to use these tools to interpret large data sets, and that includes in registries as well. We've got a lot of crossover interest with some of our physician colleagues about diseases that affect our community, such as obesity and diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and what impact that has on some of the surgery we do. The surgery we do is good, effective, reliable, but there is still variance in outcomes. So can we modify some of that variance by managing some of the associated diseases? This is an area of interest for us, and clearly things like obesity and diabetes are very prevalent in our community. So we need to understand the interaction between that and surgical outcomes. Then I get to work with some other researchers, some of them up here, some of them down the road, in areas like biomechanics, which is very dear and close to the heart of orthopaedic surgery in terms of outcomes. So we do some cadaver studies. We also do some lab-based motion analysis work and look at things that are common surgeries. Can we optimise how they're done to limit the risk? This is a particular bony procedure done for shoulder instability. Then there's novel technology that comes out. Can we incorporate some of this new technology that's emerging with some of the engineering measures of motion? Can we incorporate that into our clinical practice to measure what's happening in the community, not just when the patients come to see us, but when we see send those patients home, that can optimise their care? Or can we use that to actually enhance patients' rehabilitation? And then there's stuff that we commonly use in surgery, like suture material, understanding that better, and can we improve how that performs in human tissue? And even just simple things like projects we do, like inventing our own knots and using those in clinical practice, but in testing them in the lab first to make sure that they perform, and if so, how. So on the last two bits is around big data sets, so we've heard a bit about that. I've been privileged to work with the National Joint Replacement Registry for about 20 years, which is one of the largest registries in the country. But we also have developed over that same time frame, or in fact it's slightly older, our own regional registry. The advantage of that is we look at joint replacement outcomes, but we have a lot more information on the parameters of the patients than you would have in a national registry. We know a bit more about their disease status, their health status, and things like that. So we can align these two data sets, and we share a little bit of data from time to time for projects, which is kind of fun. You know, that's a good way to grow work. And there's nothing. That's another advantage. If you've got things like registries or existing data sets, they're kind of job ready for projects, so they're good for students. That's one of the reasons we do it. And I've again worked with Monash, and I'm a member of this group, the Orthopaedic Trauma Outcome Registry. So I work closely with the Monash team with that. We're a contributor. And through that, we've been able to do some big data projects using that data set, using machine learning and AI, looking at simple stuff. So even you'd think simple things like distal radial fractures, wrist fractures, there's not much to learn about that. Well, in fact, there is. Predicting who does well and who doesn't do well, we're trying to apply machine learning to that scope, as we are to our own data set, which I've already mentioned, but we've got a unique data set because it covers both public and private hospitals in our region and incorporating things to that. And by doing that, even in our local area, we've been able to inform national guidelines about follow-up of common things like joint replacement surgery. We used to follow them up every year, which sounds like good care, but in fact is really ineffective care. And only 0.13% of patients had any change in their care that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So it's not really a good way to occupy 1,000 appointments. So we were able to modify that. And now we have embedded new technology like surgical robots, surgical assisted surgery and navigation. On another smaller level, there's spaces, there's gaps in information around soft tissue injuries, around soft tissue surgery. Kevin Eng, one of my colleagues, and I have developed this local soft tissue registry, and that's embedded in our practice software. So the technology, digital technology, can harness and pull out information out of our software. We grab some of the information from our surgery and follow up these patients. And that's, you think, well, that's, you know, what's so novel about that? Well, it means that we have able to do things like look at when there's something changes in materials in an implant or something we use. We can monitor this real time and from a safety and efficacy point of view to make sure it's safe, then also map out how our patients are doing. And you can see even over like 5 years how the data set grows almost exponentially. So getting started is, the key thing there. And we're able to monitor real time how some of our patients are going. And so it's a good way of flagging issues, as is our national joint registry, which I've mentioned, which has got over nearly 2.5 million patients in it now. And these sort of national registries are enormously important. This one in particular has reduced the burden of revision surgery by about $1.3 billion. So it's actually had a big impact. And therefore, there's lots of data there. We've been able to track how certain prostheses are going, what certain trends are. Do we have enough equipment? Do we have enough patient slots to treat patients? And then material properties things. In orthopaedics, we're really into different implant materials. So we've shown, for example, this is just one thing that's had a global impact. Companies are now change the implants they're making based on some of this data to show just by changing how the polyethylene is treated, you can reduce revision rates by about nearly 300%. So it's this sort of thing is a big global impact. And then lastly, the clinical stuff. And this is the stuff that I like doing, but it's also the hard yards, because the results that I think Erica showed that is, it's a slow burn and it takes a lot of resilience because you get a lot of knocks along the way. But one of the first things I did was set up a randomised controlled trial on hip fractures when I came back, which is great. We got to publish that. That was very exciting, but it took 8 years. So it's not the quickest activity to translate into practice, but we have been involved in a range of international studies on hip fracture management. This is one that we did with Ian Harris on, again, thromboprophylaxis comparing to aspirin, and this was embedded in the National Joint Registry, so that was fun. Locally, we have a number of, we have a clinical trials group that we do clinical trials at. Some of the things we're interested in is using new digital technology, and there's AI embedded in this software that we plan surgery with. So we effectively do surgery before we get into the theatre. So that improves, but not just the accuracy. The question was, did it improve outcomes? Well, we looked at that, and the answer was actually it does. So it's not using some of the fancy guides and things that we've moved, but actually if you plan it, you actually improve the range of motion and the patient outcomes, and you make it more predictable. So there is, it's a way of answering the question, is there value in this? Yes, there was. And we've identified gaps, and there's gaps in understanding what even something simple like the best shoulder replacement, which is the area close to my heart, my daily clinical surgical practice. Is there, are we using the optimal prostheses or implants to do this? And at the top there, the blue graph shows that certainly nationally, there's a huge shift to using what's called a reverse total shoulder replacement, a particular type of total shoulder replacement. But there's no evidence to support that. And you'd say, well, does it matter if it's got good outcomes? Well, the outcomes are good, but it costs twice as much. So we need to know that there's value there. So we're running a randomised control, blinded randomised control trial on that. We're doing another one, which again, Ian Harrison and Rochelle Buckbinder is involved in, looking at similar blinded RCTs for rotator cuff tears. So over this short journey of mine, already it's really gratifying to sit back and say, well, have you made a difference? Sometimes it's really hard to show the impact of your work because there's such a lag to show it. But we have actually shown measurable differences in the way we manage trauma, the way we managed joint replacement surgery. So we've reduced impacting length of a stay, for example. We now have better remote models of care to look after patients so they don't have to keep on coming back to outpatients, these sort of things. And then our paediatric colleagues similarly have evolved a really stable and safe regional practice for looking after hip dysplasia. We do the same for upper limb fractures and clinics and other fracture care. So one of the things I've got orthopaedic surgery there, but it's actually the future of medicine, in effect, is going to be increasingly driven by data, new technology like this. This is how we virtually plan and virtually can execute surgery now. So this is great fun, great space to be in it, but we need to be really mindful of and challenge, are these toys actually more than toys? Are they adding value to the patient, not just to those who use it? New materials, and certainly in my sector, I think biomaterials, the incorporation of biomaterials. But we have to evaluate this, so we need good, fresh, young faces like you in the room here to be involved in evaluating that and developing that. So, in summary, why be a clinician researcher? Why do research? Well, because we want to deliver, come back to my original statement, we want to deliver the best care, and to do that we need to be able to measure and compare and evaluate. Because it's the foundation of the evidence-based surgery and medicine. Because we get to collaborate, we get to make friends, we get to see the world basically, and we literally do. And that's one of the great joys of the sort of academic practice. And I'm 50-50, so I'm 50% clinical, 50% academic. And for me, that's my sort of perfect work-life balance. They're both busy, but one's more flexible than the other, which is great. So you heard this, just say yes. So, say yes first, then figure out how you're going to do it later. Occasionally you have to say, I said yes, but actually that's not going to work. But be open to ideas, be engaged, find mentors or find, good supervisors and align yourself. So again, align to what they're doing, or find somebody who is aligned to what you want to do. And being involved in research gives you the chance not just to copy what everybody else is doing, but innovate and to drive change. And for me, that's really exciting. That's great fun. So it's this kind of, as the Paul Kelly song said, from little things, big things grow. So this was my family. And over time, they've grown up, as does your research. So that's one of the great things about your research journey. You'll look back and think, gee, that was humble beginnings, but you get to be involved in some great things. And it's the concept of standing on the shoulder of giants. So I think it's our responsibility, and it will then be handed over to your responsibility to create the platform for the next group of giants to stand on. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much for that talk, Professor Page. Does anyone have questions in the audience?
Long day.
Oh yes, up the back, thanks. Oh.
Shall I go to the next? You're right in the dark here.
Hi, Richard. Thank you so much. It was a great talk. So if we want to divide the timeline to past and future, what three characteristics would have made a good surgeon so far?
Yeah.
And about the future, whether those characteristics are going to be the same or there are different characteristics we need to make a great surgeon. It can be
question.
general surgery or it can be...
Yeah. And look, and I think it's not unique to surgery. I think we can broaden this to say clinician. There are some, shall we say, some nuances about surgery because of the way we conduct our practice. But clearly, it's well known in medicine, you need to be a great communicator. Okay, so you need to be able to really clearly spend time and understand your ideas and communicate those to other people, and that's really important in research. Whether you're as a student or as a senior researcher, you need to be able to communicate that on order of scale to get the attention you need. So that's not new, but it's becoming increasingly apparent. The tools that you need to be inquiring. You need to have, even though you're in a learning stage of your career, you need to be inquiring enough to actually recognise opportunities. Sometimes, when we heard that people don't really come knocking on your door and say, "Here's an opportunity for you. I think this, you'd be good for this." It's more the other way around. Going forward, there's no doubt, and I think surgery may be perhaps in general a little later to the game in this, in understanding the importance of some base level research skills and literature skills. Now, by that I mean the critical reading of literature and understanding the strength and weakness of it. I wouldn't say that's not been important in surgery, but I think it's become much more important. And certainly I've also got heavy involvement at a national level with training, but also with research bodies through the AOA, the Orthopaedic Association. We're embedding that much more in training now, rather than it being something that sits on the side, and the risk of that is it's in competition to your training. So it's part of creating a culture where research and the future, perhaps whether I see it or I desire it, when I say I think we as society desire it because it's necessary, is having raising the bar so that research is seen to be synergistic with daily clinical practice rather than something that happens in a room on the side. So it's actually happening at the coalface in the hospital. So again, simple things like time, funding, and those sort of commitments are not clashing with each other. That's the future as I see it, or that's the future at least as I wish it, because that's how you get it done. And I've been lucky, and I've heard some other speakers have been perhaps lucky, but I do believe you make your own luck, because it's how you seize those opportunities as they come along. It's taken me a large chunk of my career to mould my balance, my research clinical balance. That doesn't happen overnight. But if you at least have that as on the horizon, you can craft your career that way. You have to accept it's not like that from the start, because there are times when you need to do training intense activities, and there are times when you might need to take a little bit of time out, and that often means sadly, it often means take a little drop in income for a bit to get something done, but it's actually progresses your career exponentially. Not only that, it makes you just happier, and by taking that little sidestep, you get to meet some great people and work with them, and that sets you up and networks you for the future. So I'm not sure if I've totally answered your question, but I think that's how I see it.
Thanks. We have a question over here.
Hi there, my name is Jonas. I'm a third-year medical student at Monash University.
Congratulations.
And we heard a statistic this morning about how less than 1% of researchers are clinician researchers, and I would only imagine that surgeons make up even the least fraction of that.
Yeah.
So, do you think surgeons are underrepresented in this field, and how do you think it's been impacting them? progression in this field?
It is a good question, and the summary answer is yes, but. So the answer is yes. One of the challenges, and I think I alluded to in the previous comment, is different areas of medicine practice have different sort of, we do a lot of things similarly, but one of the things is when you're a surgeon and you're operating, you actually can't do much else. You can't, you can sort of, be amongst your peers within the operating theatre, but you have to give your attention to the task at hand. So if you're doing that, 50% of the week, well, that means your other 50% of the week is going to be divided in a lot of ways. However, what we can do is set surgeons up, and this is what I think through registries and a big data set and using digital data better in our hospital systems, we can capture that activity and do things with that data. So in fact, surgeons can be engaged in research that way. I tell all my colleagues locally, but also nationally, that are involved in any of the studies I'm running, you're not running the study, but you're an academic. Okay, understand that, because you are seeing patients with a problem and you're taking the time and effort to help recruit or refer or whatever. That means that you have an academic bent, and so it's creating the culture to value that. So that's where we're at the moment, but it's also embedding, as I alluded to before, embedding research culture into our trainees, and that's what we're actually in the midst of doing now. And the first in Australia, the first AOA orthopaedic trainee who's on a hybrid training academic pathway, so doing his orthopaedic fellowship and his PhD simultaneously. I was his supervisor, and I've just proofread his thesis. He's submitting in 2 weeks' time. So that's incredibly exciting, but that's a taste for the future, I see.
Yeah, we've just got a question,
Yeah.
and then we might come to Ian. Did you have a question?
Thank you, Professor Page. It's a very good presentation. And I can see many of your work involve advance in technology in surgery and biomaterials. I think that's a very hot topic in this moment. I think there's a new center in St. Vincent's Hospital that is about to open that also focus on this area.
Yeah.
Many of this project was favor people with a background in engineering. Do you think for clinicians it will be good to pursue a degree or some work experience in engineering to get involved in this topic, or generally speaking, like clinicians will have different roles in those teams?
From personal experience, and I think echoing what we've heard already, I think what we bring to the table is really important. It's hard to be a dual expert, so I think what you do is you work alongside, and I work alongside engineers and things like that. So I don't think unless you've got a really deep passion, going off to a dual degree is necessary. But what we're finding, particularly through postgrad medicine, there's a lot of people who bring that to the table because it's what they've already got. I think that's exciting. And that's one of the upsides of postgraduate medicine, is that you've got this diverse background of people who are coming through, and they can bring their skills. So those skills can flourish later in their career. But I think when it comes to opening labs, just as I'm not a geneticist, I'm not a biomaterial scientist, but I have clinical questions that are relevant. So I bring patient problems and relevance to the table, and I know people, and that's the collaboration and the network that grows around you. So a lot of people do come to you when you start developing a profile. One of the advantages of doing a PhD, for example, is you become an instant world expert on a thing. But generally, if you look at what most people translate their PhDs into, it's not the thing, but it's the discipline of that gets them there. So I certainly wouldn't put people off that. I too I have a PhD proposal that's been sitting on my laptop. It's been sitting there for about 8 years. But am I going to do it? Probably not, in all honesty, because it's a life balancing. Do I want to, if I couldn't operate for some reason or something happened or I was unwell, I'd probably explore it. But it's not going to change what I'm doing. But I'm very enthusiastic for people who do, because I think in the future it does give you that discipline, whether they're masters or whatever. Yeah.
I was just going to add a comment in response to that question. There's the University of Illinois has just been accredited for a combined sort of medical and engineering graduate entry degree, where 65% of their students are engineers, and it's been co-designed the program alongside AI experts, machine learners, and engineers. And there's 2 years. They all come out coding. Many of them come in coding as well, and many have established startups. So you're referring to the Aikenhead Centre here at St Vincent's, which is a partnership with the St Vincent's Hospital and the University of Melbourne and RMIT and the Bionics Institute, a number of others. So there's going to be a big focus of medtech in there, including some orthopaedic surgeons are going to be there. And so the MD here in Melbourne will adjust to give some of those experiences, but we're not quite ready for a whole curriculum change that accommodates AI and tech, but that is certainly coming because it's started already in the US.
Yeah, I think there's certainly the need for those skills. I think that's great.
Maybe I could just add to that. One of my current PhD students started with engineering, went on to do another degree in econometrics, went back and did medicine, and is now training as a critical care specialist, and he's in the Navy. So not that, he's really a high achiever. I'm very proud of him. All I would say is that there's no wasted experience, and that people bring everything from their background to, make a career. And that's what I meant. Like, there's no right or wrong way to do research or have a career. Your career will be yours and yours alone. But all the experience that people bring to the table is valuable, and there are ways to capitalise on things that people bring to the table. Thank you.
I'd echo that. I think that's incredibly important. I think that's perhaps why I just threw up that I've had a slightly different pathway into this. But my one-liner has always been it's never a great walk from the long walk from the tractor shed to the orthopaedic theatre. Just the tools we use in orthopaedic theatres are a bit more expensive, but they're not unfamiliar. But it's that experience, and I see that in a lot of our students. We've got surgeons come through who've done pharmacy, and so they bring those skills to the table. Biostatisticians have come through surgery. It's musicians, lawyers, all diverse, and they bring something to their, and it may not be immediately in their career, but during their career pathway it adds something, and that's again, I echo, it's one of the great upsides of a postgrad training pathway.
Great, I think that's a really nice way to wrap up the session. So thank you so much for your talk again.
Thanks.